Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm so excited for today's conversation with today's guest. Michael Kummer is here with us. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Coach. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I am very deeply excited for this conversation for, as I was sharing before the show, personal reasons as well, which I'll share in a bit. And I know it's just going to be such a great conversation to learn from you. So for those who don't know who Michael is, Michael Kummer is the founder of MK Supplements, a dietary supplement brand that offers freeze-dried organ meats sourced from 100% pasture-raised cattle. He is also the principal writer of the popular healthy living blog at michaelkummer.com, which has reached more than 6 million readers since its inception in 2012. And he's also the host of the incredible Primal Shift podcast. Michael is a former professional 100-meter sprinter and an avid CrossFitter who follows an animal-based diet. He was born and raised in Austria, and he speaks German, English, and Spanish. But since moving to the United States, he has lived and worked in the greater Atlanta area with his wife, Kathy, and their children, Isabella and Lucas. The family operates a suburban homestead that features beehives, geese, rabbits, and a flock of chickens.
That's right.
Is there anything else to add to that list? Do you have more animals now since writing that?
We have significantly more chickens since writing this. So I think at the time we had less than 20, and now we have 100 right now. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you use them? Are they just for eggs or also for meat?
Most of them are for eggs, but there are 31, I think, right now that are gonna end up in the freezer in about a month.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh, I wish I lived closer. I need to find a chicken supplier still. Amazing. Okay, so before we go any further, I've got a lot of questions for you and really excited to dive in today. I think it's great to start things off I know I shared a little bit of your backstory, but I would love to hear a little bit more. I know my audience would as well, of your story and journey into health. What got you so passionate about health, about, obviously starting your own homestead? What's been your journey into this world?
Yeah. I think it was the realization that what we're doing ain't working and that we are all either sick or on the path towards getting sicker. Specifically, I had irritable bowel syndrome for most of my life. I remember when I was probably in middle school or so, it started, bloating and, GI issues like all the time. And since my dad had it and his dad died of colon cancer, I think when he was late 40s, I figured, well, it's in the family kind of thing, and that's just how it is. And it wasn't until I moved to the US and started assuming a standard American diet, unfortunately, that I really realized that, things are not going well. My physique is changing. And before that, I used to be a professional athlete, as you mentioned, and I was in pretty good shape, in my early 20s. But I was never healthy. And I never realized that until much later when I'm after changing my diet, and I realized, wow, this is how it feels to feel good. I never had that before. And, no more stomach issues, nothing. And, that made me really think of, okay, what are we doing and what are we supposed to be doing? Yeah. And then my wife and I watched a documentary on Netflix about the amount of added sugars the average American consumes in a year. And it was I don't know what the number was, 100 pounds or something crazy, something unbelievable. Yeah. And I'm like, this is nuts. We got to do something. And my wife was diagnosed with pre-diabetes before we actually got married and had headaches all the time. And, we were just, I guess, as sick as most other people are and thinking it's normal. That's just how it is. And then we started making changes and noticed dramatic differences. I'm like, whoa, So just by changing our diet a little bit, suddenly, we feel significantly better. And that really got the ball rolling in questioning everything else that's health and wellness related. And, at some point we discovered, well, our food supply is broken. Those food-like substances we're offered in the store are not really the things we should be eating. And so we got to take control of our own food supply, and that led into homesteading and then, homeschooling. And I kind of feel like, almost like a a conspiracy theorist and a theorist about doing all of the things exactly the opposite of everyone else, but it's working. And I'm like, you know what? I think we're on the right path. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm so with you in all of that. On a similar journey myself with my husband. And as I mentioned to you before the show, we're hoping to buy land and start our little homestead over the next couple of years, which will be exciting. And yeah, isn't it? It's fascinating that we live in a world now where anything natural, or like canning your own food, right? Or making your own, well, I just got in on the black market raw milk movement actually this week, which I'm feeling pretty hardcore about. But like these things that are so natural are now legal, right? Like they're either illegal or they're looked down upon, or now you're considered a prepper or a conspiracy theorist because you actually want to like have your own food from like natural processes where it's not been killed and, heavily chemicalized. So it's backwards.
It is completely backwards, unfortunately. And, if you look out there, if you just look at statistics or just watch people, if you every time I board an airplane, I watch people that walk by me. I'm like, okay, who is metabolically healthy?
Yeah,
nobody. I like whatever we are doing, in the grander scheme of society ain't working. And so maybe not everything that we are doing is right or is where we're gonna end up ultimately. But at least we are doing something, and it seems like we're walking in the right direction. We obviously make changes, we adjust, we backpedal if we discover something wasn't working. But at least just not thinking about, not being intentional about your health choices and food choices, I think is criminal.
Yeah, I so agree, and I hope this is really landing for everyone listening. I think just hearing you share that, really comes back for me about how much we've just given our power away when it comes to our health, right? We've just completely surrendered to the government, to big ag, to the pharmaceutical companies. Like they will take care of me, right? And we've totally disengaged from our own power and our own choices around like, what am I choosing to put in my body? And the fact that, most people don't even know that they have a choice, right? And they can actually do so much about it. They don't have to just totally surrender. We can arm ourselves with information. I know your podcast and your blog does this, and my podcast does this, to at least start dropping those pieces for people to follow the breadcrumbs, right?
That's right. And see what works for you, huh?
Yeah. I'm curious, like, obviously you live such a holistically healthy lifestyle. Well, that's my assumption. I believe so, right? And grow a lot of your own food.
It ain't perfect, but we're trying to, like my son likes to say, I'm trying my best. And so we're trying our best too.
Yeah. Me too. Yes. I don't think perfection is necessarily what we need to be shooting for, but I'm curious, like, what do you feel like in what you've learned and the journey that you've been on are the key pillars to a healthy lifestyle?
I like, to say there are at least, 8 or 9, but there are probably more depending on how, into what subcategories you want to go. But, sleep, diet, exercise, hormetic stressors, tribalism, or, just being part of a community, stress management, exposure to nature, be it sun, be it, earth, all of those things, I think play together. There is, spiritualism, obviously. There are so many things that I think ultimately, I firmly believe that if you look at how earlier humans, and you don't have to go, millions of years back, but, go a few thousand years maybe back, or a few hundred years for that matter, and try to look at what they've been doing, and try to kind of bring some of that back and push out some of those modern things that I explained to my 10-year-old daughter yesterday that, just imagine, even when I was a kid, there was no social media. Computers just started at least being accessible, to us, to regular people. There was no, cell phones, none of that. And then even think about, your grandmother, if you cry now because we take away your iPad, explaining that to my grandmother would not make any sense, And so all of those modern things, especially over the past, I want to say, maybe 100, 150, 200 years, we've accelerated so much that I think our bodies have not adapted to the world we live in. We live in a world that we have not been designed for. We should be living thousands of years back. Obviously there, we constantly adapt and evolve and change, etc., but not at the speed of human innovation. It looks like, and I think that has caused a lot of issues with, plastic and food-like substances and all the conveniences, never being exposed to hot or to cold. You're always comfortable. You don't have to walk. You can take the escalator. All of those things are 100% against how we have evolved over however many years you think we have been on this planet. It doesn't really matter if, I think it's been millions of years, with, including our, ancestors. But even if you think it's only been a few thousand years, still, the environment has changed so fast and so dramatically that our brains, our bodies have a very hard time adapting. Maybe at one point in the future, we all thrive on processed sugars, maybe, but I don't want to be, the tip of the spear, to get there.
Yeah. It's interesting when we actually look, and everyone listening to this, like if we really pull back and look at the bird's eye view, we see all of this progress. For those just listening, I'm using air quotes, right? This progress in humanity, right? All the inventions, all of the new like technology, all the new stuff that's happening, the new processes for making food, right? And we think this is all in the name of progress and growth. And when we actually take a hard look, like we can very clearly see how dramatically sick we've all become over the last just couple decades, right? All of these other things have been on the rise, right? Technology being one of them, agricultural innovations being one of them. And we're not getting healthier. Right. And in we're supposed to, right? We've got all these new drugs, all these new solutions for like helping keep us healthy. There's new vaccines every day, right? Like, why are we not healthier? Right. I mean, even just looking at that, like we don't need scientific proof. Just look at like you said, look at the next time you're on an airplane or next time you're at the grocery store. And it's pretty clear that, as you've mentioned many times, like it's something is out of whack, something's not working. And I know there's many of us here who are like rewilding, I call it, right? We're getting back to our roots and thinking like, how did my grandma live? It's actually fascinating you talk about that because there's a woman down the road who's actually my sister-in-law's grandmother-in-law. So she's related to the family unit and she's grown up and lived in this neighborhood forever. And I see her when I run in the morning. She's sometimes out getting her newspaper. She's 95. She still lives alone in this house, and having conversations with her has just been so incredible because she grew up like obviously growing everything themselves. She was telling me about how they even used to make their own pop. Like they used to make their own soda with ingredients like from the garden. And, it's just so incredible to take that wisdom and realize that, maybe we need to get back into some of that if we actually want to be healthy, right? And we want to actually live till we're 95 by ourselves in this big house, right? Like, and be able to still do that, right? It's
exactly.
So how do we begin to do that? So I know one of the challenges that so many of my listeners, and I know I've been through this in the past, is, we do live in this world now with sort of total information overload, right? I mean, there's billions of podcasts and YouTube videos and books, and like there's so much information out there, right, being pushed at us, especially around like nutrition and health and lifestyle areas. So how do we actually start to like search through maybe some of this conflicting information? I know there's lots of that, right? Should we eat meat? Should we not? Should we eat dairy? Should we not? Is gluten bad? Is it not? And like, how do we get through that so we're not driving ourselves crazy and find, what really works for us?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I don't think that I have a great answer for that, because I know a lot of people, including my wife, are struggling exactly with that. There's just so much information. Every time you hear something new, you realize, we are in trouble, back in the days when we discovered, okay, it's added sugar, is the enemy. Then it was, processed carbohydrates. Then it was, certain plant toxins, especially from keto-friendly stuff like nut butters and stuff, maybe not so great for us. Then it was xenoestrogens in plastics and personal care products. Then it's EMFs. Then, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and it's just very fatiguing, and you get into decision fatigue and you just don't want to do anything, and for me, it's always been a little I think easier than for many other people, because I just take something and I run with it, and I run it into the ground. And if something doesn't work, I change. For me, I find it challenging. I envision, even, there, there are certain, people like, oh, what if, I don't know, civil, unrest and whatever, and that would be horrible, and we, have to prepare and whatever. But I'm like, even if that happened, I think I would thrive in such an environment because I like the challenge. But most people don't have that. They get overwhelmed. And so I think uh, having less information probably helps. Finding maybe someone who you think sounds reasonable and who you trust. Try that for a while, and just, ignore everything else and just really listen to how you feel. Does it make sense to you? Does it, and apply kind of also common sense. And, I like to think, I believe in evolution. I believe that I don't know where the universe and whatever, how it came to be, in the first place. But after a certain point, I believe that evolution is a real thing. Like, there was, certain development milestones, etc. So, and if you, and even if you don't believe in that, and you don't go back millions of years, maybe only a few thousand years. But if you look at that and say, okay, what did our previous earlier humans do? How is that worked out for them? What makes sense? Does it make sense that, for example, meat is terrible for us, even though it's very likely that humans, and early humans in particular, have consumed that for a long time? Does it make sense that meat is bad, that if you live, in any region where there are 4 distinct seasons, that you cannot eat anything, you know, in at least 2 of those, seasons, or maybe even 3, depending on where you're, like in Canada.
Yep.
I would
I
assume
would
that there
starve
is a
in the
lot of,
winter. I would
yeah,
starve.
what are you gonna eat? What are you gonna eat? So does it make sense that the only thing you can eat is terrible for us and causes cancer?
Yeah.
That does not make any sense.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, the type of meat that we are producing. Maybe it's, the type of foods that we're consuming together with meat. Maybe it's the burger bun that goes with the patty, that's causing the issue, and not the patty. It's, there are, applying common sense kind of filters out a lot of the I don't want to say extremes, because for most people eating predominantly meat sounds extreme. And it's not for me. But filtering it kind of filters out a lot of the things that just don't make sense. If I had to eat only what's local and what's in season, then that's evidently what's good for humans, because otherwise we would not be here, right? If we could not eat locally, hyper locally, and hyper seasonally, we would not be having this conversation right now. Because it's not because of globalization that happened in the last 50, 100, 200 years that now we can suddenly thrive as a species. No, we've been thriving as a species for a long time before we could fly in, certain foods from the other end of the world, So if you apply that concept, then you can get a rough idea of what your framework should be. And then within that framework, I truly believe that you gotta try and see how you feel. And you gotta, try it for a while, because any change that you implement can, short term have a negative side effect. If you've never eaten a lot of meat and suddenly you only eat meat, maybe you don't have the digestive enzymes. Maybe you don't have, the digestive juices, to digest that meat, and you might feel sick, or whatever. But over time, if you give it 30, 60, 90 days, you'll figure out if something feels good or if it doesn't. And then from there, you can fine tune and maybe add other things, remove other things, and kind of figure out what works. But that's kind of, here's the thing. I mean, if depending on where your starting point is, that can be a very long journey until you end up where, you want to be. And so I like to think that, I've tried, we've done meatless Mondays in the past. I'm afraid to say it. I've done keto, I've done, paleo. Never strict vegan, because that never made sense to me. That never felt good to me. But we ate a significant amount of different plants before, and we've reached now a point where, like, okay, an animal-based framework appears to make a lot of sense from everything we know how humans have been living for a very long time. It feels good to us. But within that framework, there's room for certain plants, and especially if it's seasonal, if it's local, if it's stuff that I can grow in my backyard in summer, and even if it's something that I would not recommend eating, or that I would never eat, like, leafy greens, like spinach or kale, there are so many reasons why I would never eat that. But even if I did, during that one time of the year where that stuff grows in my backyard, and if I were to eat it, I would be perfectly fine with that. But eating that, 365 days a year, probably is not going to make sense. But it would also not make sense in the context of how humans have been, doing things. And so I think if you take that concept into account, and if you follow someone, that kind of appears to make sense from a common sense perspective, then you can cut out all of the noise and just run with it and see how you feel.
Yeah, I love this so much. Thank you for sharing those pieces. Very much aligned with a lot of what I share and what I believe too. Is this like one of the fun things I often have my clients do is an information detox. Like we're working together. Yeah. You're tuning out everything else because it's just going to drive you crazy, right? You're going to get conflicting information. Try this on, and then you can go do something else, right? If that doesn't work. And I think that's so potent what you shared there. Essentially, like what I heard in that is like eat real food. Right. I think Michael Pollan always said that, right? Like eat real food. Like, is this real food? Right. Is that McDonald's meat burger real meat? I don't know. Right. The Beyond Burger, right? Like, is that real food? Probably not. Right. So thinking about like what would grow on a farm, right? Or what would grow in nature, or what you could hunt
in your area and at the time when you want to eat it. If you check that off, then you are already on a very good path, I think. And from there, it's fine tuning rather than.
I guess I'm eating bunnies because they're just all over my yard right now. So
that's why one of the reasons why we breed rabbits.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, my cats love them. They've been eating them nonstop. So, but I love that. And the piece that really aligns with a lot of what we talk about on the podcast here is then listen to your body. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people get tripped up on. I know the women, that I work with and many of my listeners, right, are out of tune with their body, right? Don't even really know how to listen to like, what does it feel like when something feels good in my body? Because they maybe have spent their whole lives feeling crap, right? And that's the new normal. Well, it's normal to be bloated and gassy after eating, right? It's normal to, wake up in the middle of the night with sweats, right? It's normal to be tired all day. So, I think that, that's a big part of the journey is even just learning how to listen to your body and be in tune with your body again, and then starting to play with different, real foods, which is, as I kind of mentioned briefly earlier, something I'm doing with raw milk. In the past, like dairy products haven't always agreed with me, but raw milk is a completely different, animal for pun intended. And I'm giving that a try and I want to see how that feels. And I'm going to test it out over the next little bit and learn, does this work for me? So I think that's so beautiful if we can really just pare back. And I think this is such a topic I know is resonating with many because this piece is such a big challenge. As you said, your wife struggles with it. We all do. I think it's just so stressful, this added load of stress of like not knowing what's right because we don't know how to listen to ourselves and our common sense. You've mentioned a few times, right? I'm worried about our society's ability to even tune into common sense, right? A lot of that is kind of gone out the window through, social conditioning and government protocols. And like, there's just a lot, right? That is kind of, made it difficult for us sometimes to even know what common sense is anymore. But I think, the more we can come back into our intuition, the more you reconnect with the land, the more that becomes a part of like really an inner knowing and then trusting that inner knowing, right? Trusting that, veganism doesn't quite feel right. And I don't need to explain it with science. It doesn't feel right to me. I'm not going to do it. Right. And I think that's really powerful. So how do you bring this in with kids? This is the next area that I want to go because I'm expecting my first actually in October, and I'm so excited to like do things different. And I'm going to do everything the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Maybe not everything, but I'm going to do my best. And I can imagine. I know many of my listeners as well have kids, either young kids or grandkids. And this can be a big challenge when it comes to especially like healthy food and healthy eating. So how have you navigated that with your kids? Like how have you helped them foster that connection with their food, connection with their body, and essentially helping them eat healthy, right? Because I know most people listening, and my childhood, all I wanted to eat was sugar growing up, right? As a kid, right? That's going to be the like go-to, right?
So I think when we had our daughter in the beginning, I mean, we kind of had an idea. We were already on the no added sugar kind of journey at the time. Yes. So the added sugar wasn't an issue with our first kid, but we had no idea about, plant toxins and many of the other concepts that we're aware of now. So, and even so, I remember in the beginning, she must have been maybe 1.5 years old. We still have pictures where she was, munching on bread, especially when we were traveling. And fortunately, she was, when we made the change, then she was still fairly young, where she, if she was 10 years old and we would now introduce a change, it would be significantly more challenging because she already has an opinion, she thinks on her own, she's independent, kind of thing. But at the time it was still fairly easy by just not having stuff at home, that they were not supposed to have. And as they grew older, that became even more important, because in the beginning, you just put it, in the upper shelf and they don't see it, out of sight, out of mind, so to say. But as they got into, preparing their own food and, just going to the pantry and grabbing something if they are hungry in the afternoon, it really became a matter of not having at home what they are not supposed to eat. So whenever they said, hey, I'm hungry, I said, well, go to the pantry, whatever you can find, chances are you can eat. If you only have good stuff at home, you don't run into an argument why, no, it's there, but you cannot have it. So why is it there? At some point that they question, why can you have it, but I cannot have it? I mean, there are certain things like maybe alcohol or caffeine or whatever, where you still have that conversation. But I think it's more, our society is more like, well, they might hear it from someone other than you that, hey, you're 5 years old, you cannot have wine or you cannot have beer, whatever you might have at home. But with other things, with candy, with chocolate, with processed foods, with chips, what have you, that conversation becomes very difficult, because they are right. If I cannot have it, why is it at home? Because if I should not have it, you shouldn't be having it either. Right. And so that was one thing that we did. We just removed. We said, you know what? If the kids cannot have it, then we shouldn't be having it either. And then that argument was gone. There are still, every so often, hey, eat your protein first before you have the orange or the apple or, what have you. So there is still like little, times where there is maybe some friction, or where there's some, need for explanation or to encourage them to do something differently than they would do otherwise. Because if you think about it, I mean, even in the animal world, everyone goes for the dessert first. If you put a cow into a pasture with very succulent kind of grasses and then some other things, they go for the good stuff first, for the tasty stuff first. Why? It's in human nature, So, put something sweet, be it a fruit, and then, maybe a, piece of steak. Well, steak is maybe different because they all love steaks. So they would probably go for the steak first. But, nice. Something else, they would go for the sweet stuff first, And so it's really then up to you to, sometimes when we make dinner, we only put the protein on the table and nothing else. And then when everyone is, done eating, so oh, by the way, we also have, fried plantains, and, something sweet, carbohydrate.
Yeah.
But at that point, they already had the protein. So, that's good. But I think it's really, sometimes you need to rip off the Band-Aid. If you've already been into, if your kid is already a little older or whatever, or you've been, kid has been eating candy for several years, it's going to be a tough, there's going to be a lot of crying, but I think you have to rip off the Band-Aid, because at the end of the day, if you're feeding your children food that's inappropriate, it's like, it's toxic stuff. Why would you poison, your kids any more than now that just because the kid might be crying or whatever, I don't see myself as the best friend of my children. I'm the parent. I want to give them a framework so they can be better human beings down the line once we are no longer involved. That's and that's not always a popular role to have, Yep. But still, I mean, we've had, even our pediatrician, I remember at the time, great guy, really friendly and open to pretty much anything, but that was like, oh, just put some brown sugar on whatever to make them eat. I'm like, right. No, not going to do that, or, certain, whatever, be it vaccines or, anything that, you don't agree with because it doesn't seem to be making sense to you. I think you have to stand your ground. You have to learn, be comfortable when it's uncomfortable, and that's a general concept, I mean, in every regard, you gotta be okay even if when you're uncomfortable. That's, I think, that helps you become more resilient and to adapt. And in particular with children and parenting, you're gonna be tested. And the more resilient you are, yep. And the quicker you adapt, the better it is. And now if we go to a party and in the beginning was like, oh, now I have to tell them, no, we can't, our kids not going to have the pizza and the pie, whatever. We brought our own food. It was uncomfortable. It was awkward. We were the only ones. Now I go in and, I see it as a teaching opportunity. If someone asks you, why are you doing this? I say, well, because I'm not poisoning my kids. Are you? No, I'm not saying that, but, but it's a teaching opportunity, and then it's up to them, use that information or think I'm crazy. I don't care one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely have to have that backbone and resiliency of like knowing what's right for you and knowing that you're doing things different. I think anyone giving up sugar or living, more of a holistic life kind of is going against the grain, and we have to kind of be the black sheep, right? And be okay with that in a way, right? And build that.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I
I
think
found
it's
that
easier if,
really,
like for you, if you don't, anyone who does not have kids yet, it's much easier to not introduce something than taking it away later, and that includes, in our case, my wife said if we were to start over, we would not put on shoes on our kids. We let them run barefoot, as much as possible. Or naked for that matter, be exposed to the elements. when I was a kid, we were running around naked. Here in the US, apparently that's not a thing. Everyone needs to be, completely buttoned up and everything. I'm like, don't agree with that necessarily. And, I would never, ever again give an electronic device, not for flying, not if the flight is 20 hours, it doesn't matter. They can do something else, because taking that thing away then in a couple of years, like I just did this morning with our kids, is not pleasant,
Yeah. Yeah, a nightmare. I've seen that. I've seen friends doing that. It's just a nightmare, right? Especially with electronics or candy, right? These are the addictive things that are, yeah. And I'm getting a fresh slate. I'm hoping to be able to, really set that up, and how much easier it is, as you said, to just not start that. It really resonated with what you shared earlier, because I think that's, obviously there's so many mindset pieces, but the hypocrisy that a lot of us deal with like, mom can have ice cream, but you can't. Right. And like, why? Like, of course that's going to not make sense to a kid. Right. And it's going to create a temper tantrum or an issue because you're not being honest, or there's like a level of hypocrisy there. Right. And, not having that in the house is beneficial for everybody. And maybe making guidelines around when you do have those things. If you're choosing to, maybe it's not in the house, but we go out for ice cream once a month or something. Right. And we do that together. And, I think, I love what you said, and I'm soaking that in, because, I'm going to there's a lot of challenges and learning that I'm definitely going to have as I navigate into this. But for anyone also who's listening that has kids, that, I just want to touch on this as well, because I know there's a lot of mom, dad guilt out there, right? Of like, wow, I didn't know any of this, and I've totally messed up. My kid's addicted to sugar now and addicted to their iPad. What would you say to someone there who's like, maybe been doing these things for years and is now realizing and wanting to maybe start paring back or starting to heal? I know you've mentioned it's difficult, but do you have any tips as to like how parents may be able to, start that at any age?
Worrying about the past or what might happen in the future is a recipe for anxiety and disaster at the end of the day. You gotta be present. Whatever you did yesterday, now is your chance to do better. And feeling guilty about whatever you did just because you didn't know. I mean, I'd be feeling guilty all day, because I made so many things, so many mistakes that, based on the knowledge that I had at the time, it doesn't really matter, just do better right now. And I think there's actually a book I found at the library the other day. I think the title is Fuck Feelings or Fuck Emotions or something like this, where, it gave the example of, having negative emotions about, guilt or things that happened in the past or that you didn't do or did do. It's not helpful. It doesn't, it's not going to bring you forward. It's not going to help your kid. You want to be as happy as you possibly can so you can be the best possible parent, and if you're sad and depressed and anxious about, all of the candy you handed to your kid, it's not going to make you a better parent, So I would say, focus on the present. What can you do right now at this moment, that makes a difference. And
Yeah.
And the human body is resilient. I mean, if it wasn't, we'd be all dead, already. So we can take a lot of abuse, and still get out of it. And so.
Totally. Yeah. I even look at my history, I used to just like pound sugar, and for years I was just eating pasta and sugar, and I'm okay. My health is good. All my numbers are good. Like I figured it out. So it's never too late. And, Yeah, I love that. Just don't live in the past, right? Kind of having that self-compassion and
Yeah.
finding a way to take in new knowledge, be like, oh, okay, I didn't realize seed oils were so toxic. Let's start
Hmm.
getting them out of our home and not worry about how many seed oils we ate yesterday, right? Like, great,
Right.
let's like move forward and make that
Yeah.
change, right? I think that's such a healthy way to go about it instead of letting the tornado of anxiety and shame really,
Yeah.
rob you of your energy with your kids as well and yourself. I know this is for
Right.
kids, but also in our own journey when we realize like, oh, I shouldn't have been eating that. Like that's, caused disease or really caused an issue for me. And we just take it from there and start
Right.
going forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about growing your own food.
Yeah.
I want to know all the things about growing your own food, but how do you think? What are your thoughts about growing your own food? First of all, like, do you think everybody needs to be doing that? And if so, like, how do we even begin to do that? I know there's lots of people obviously living in cities, and not everyone's like you and me who want to go and get land and live out in the
Right.
country. Yeah, what do you feel is kind of the next steps and solutions there for us?
I think everyone needs to grow something, and even if it's a tomato plant inside of the house or whatever it might be, or a mint or, some herb, what have you. But you gotta be, I think, involved in some sort of food um, growing, or at least very close to the supply chain. Going to the supermarket and getting a finished product, not knowing where it came from, how it was raised, etc. I think is just not a good idea, because you have no understanding of what it takes to grow something, what it means to be, how to differentiate between good high quality food and poor quality food. You know none of that. You don't. If you've never grown anything, and especially with plants, how do you know what's the difference between growing something organically? What does it actually mean? Does it mean chemical free? No, it doesn't. It just means an approved list of chemicals that someone can use. And I would particularly, I don't want to single them out, but especially vegans, I would highly recommend to try to grow their own food and see how many animals they have to kill to grow that tomato plant.
Yeah.
you know because
Right.
that's going to bust their bubble that they're eating without killing animals,
Yeah.
and then extrapolate that on a larger scale, where we're not talking about one tomato plant where I can hand pick the caterpillar and moving to my neighbor. No, we are talking about something where nobody goes hand picking anything, where they plow through everything, kill rodents and rabbits and
Yeah.
deer and all of those things, so you can have your tofu burger.
Yeah.
And so that really goes back to understanding, what does it take to grow something, be it or raise something, be it an animal or be it a plant.
Yeah.
It's work. There is a, I don't want to say there's a science to it, but there are certain principles you need to adhere to, and if you don't, stuff is not going to work. And if you get that understanding, what it actually takes to grow, what it how much light it requires, how much, what soil fertility, how important that is, how you can improve it. Are you going to get synthetic fertilizer from the store, or are you maybe leveraging your animals to provide manure that can fertilize? That by itself will tell you that growing monocrops is not sustainable, is not good for the environment, is not good for anything. But if you take animals into the picture, and if you let them fertilize the soil, and then you grow
Mhm.
something on it, maybe a plant or whatever, then the whole thing makes sense, because it's like one ecosystem where everything works together. And that understanding, I think, is sorely missing
Mhm.
in our society, and that leads to poor, even once you know what it takes to grow real food and how it tastes, you're not going to go to the store and eat a Beyond Burger, a
Yeah.
chemical sludge, that was mixed together somewhere, on the other side of the planet and flown in. None of that makes sense. And so I think everyone needs to be growing something, at least to get an appreciation of how difficult it is to grow something and to feed yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, so love that. I know, even as a amateur starter gardener, like there's so much work and there's so many times that things fail and you're like,
Yeah.
no, or the deer comes by and eats all of, oh no, there it
uh,
goes. Right. And the snails and yeah, I really, I'm glad that you mentioned that piece too. I think this is like, I'm also hearing this conversation around death, and finding our way to understand that death is a part of life. And
yeah.
no matter what we're eating, we're killing animals.
Yeah.
Right. And whether you're out hunting or you're eating cow, or you're eating tomatoes and tofu, right? So many animals are dying. They may be smaller animals,
Hmm.
right? but in my opinion, that's even more lives lost, right? As opposed to
Yeah.
one life to feed a family for a year, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of like misconception there. And when we're not connected to how we're growing the food, we don't see that, right?
Yeah.
Or you don't have carnivore cats like I do. That's even been hard for me. We hunt and like really are connected to food in that way. But even just watching the cats like go out and get their breakfast, even though they don't have
Yeah.
to. I make their own raw food here, but
Right.
yeah, it's just a whole cycle of really understanding how the ecosystem is actually like naturally supposed to work,
Yeah.
right? And we're not like hiding from that by all of a sudden just eating more plants, right? And
Yeah.
actually doing more harm to ourselves, in my opinion, by
Yeah.
doing that or eating that lifestyle,
And
right?
to the environment, really, because
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of things that a lot of people don't seem to appreciate, and one is, you know, a lot of the land that we have cannot be used, for tillage, cannot be used to
Right.
grow, crops. But you can put ruminants on there. You can put cattle on there. So cows or ruminants, generally speaking, are not taking away land that we could grow, wheat and corn or whatever. We can put them on lands and rotationally graze them where nothing else would be growing anyway for whatever reason. The water consumption is another great example, especially with cattle. People always say, oh, they consume so much water, but guess what? The urinated water, it goes back into the groundwater. So there is no net loss of water, and a lot comes from the rain anyway, if it's done right. And how to improve the soil, and just what we have seen in our, we bought this house. It had a Bermuda, lawn, like, spotless, sprayed, the whole, what you would expect in a residential kind of environment, And ever since we've started rotating our chickens, rotating our rabbits, I mean, now stuff is growing. It's growing into a pasture, and just seeing that change within a few years, how we suddenly, have topsoil where before it was all clay, and
Wow.
and all of those changes in only a few years, I'm like, this is how you improve soil fertility, how you can, sequester carbon, and all of those things, and use your animals to fertilize, and then we can use that, manure to grow plants,
Yeah.
and kind of, have that cycle repeat. And and then the other nuance that it is that in most towns, the food supply lasts for about 3 days, and we've seen before, when there was, ice storm or whatever in Atlanta, or whatever, the natural disaster might have been, all the stores were empty. Is that a system you want to rely on, where you know that you have food for 3 days and then it's game over? No, you want to have, local resources that can supply food, without running out in 3 days. And in our case, we get 27 eggs every single day. We're not going to be running out of eggs anytime soon. We have rabbits, that we can butcher. We have, bees that give us 80 pounds of honey a year. So, that's kind of the thing. You want to have your food production, local, close by, so you're not dependent on, having stuff flown in case there is something. It there's always going to be something, be it a natural disaster or something man-made. It doesn't really matter, Stuff is going to happen, and you don't want to stand on a fragile system that falls apart, and then everyone freaks out because, their toilet paper is gone at Costco.
I just had that thought as you were talking. I was like, so how do we grow our own toilet paper, right? So that doesn't happen again.
You can use leaves.
Yeah, we have maple leaves here. They're
Yeah,
perfect for outdoor toilet paper. I can attest to that personally.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a very real factor when we do need to get serious about, our food supply. And I mean, even for people who are like not that far down the rabbit hole of like that being cut off, or, even going farther into, some of the theories about what may be coming with our food supply, but even the prices. I know here in Canada, I'm sure it's kind of been worldwide since COVID, right? Like everything's doubled in price.
Yeah.
And like, how are you supposed to keep up with that? Right. And, it's so much cheaper. Yes, it takes more time and you need to learn and you need to connect with your food, but growing your own food or going out hunting or getting in on a cow share or something, right, is going to massively save you money, not only on your medical bills in the future, because you're actually eating real local food.
Right.
But, buying this crap in the store is now, not a no-brainer. It's not necessarily like so cheap to go and buy a tomato at the store versus yourself. And my hope is that farmers markets become, more on par with the store, right? So a tomato that's come from Chile or California for us, right, can cost the same as a locally grown tomato. So people are more motivated perhaps to go to the farmer's market and buy that local tomato.
And the other nuance to that, obviously is that a lot of, people go to the farmer's market in January and then expect, a tomato.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. But if you buy tomato, let's say at the end of the growing season, because typically, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but at least here in the, central southern part of the United States, the way tomatoes grow is, they produce, once, they start producing, they're relatively consistent. And then at the end, before the first frost or whatever hits in, you get like an abundance of tomatoes. Yeah. And that happens very often. And then farmers have way too much and they give it away at a cheaper price towards the end of the season. If you buy then, you can get it significantly cheaper probably than the ones that are flown in from somewhere. But if you expect your tomato, in January where it's not growing, then yeah, it's probably going to be more expensive because, it needs to be in a greenhouse or what have you, that requires electricity and, all of those things. Yeah. And so it's also a thing about eating what's in season where it's cheap to produce, and not something out of season where it's expensive to produce, Right. And then the other nuance to that is, I think specifically with, let's take a cow, for example, everyone likes, ribeye steak, or at least, I like a ribeye steak, but there are only so many ribeye steaks in one cow. And we buy one entire cow. We actually just got our delivery, the other day. And there are, I don't know, let's say 15 ribeyes, from that one cow. Yep. There is one tongue, there is one liver, there is one heart. There are a couple of, many things are limited in how much you get. There is one brisket, And so, but if you want to have brisket every single week, it's going to get expensive because you need, one cow for each of the briskets that, that you want to consume. So you also need to learn that if you, get an animal, or if you want to consume an animal, you need to consume it nose to tail, and that's also for the farmer. If I'm growing cattle, to sell to a restaurant and they only want to have steak, what I'm going to do with all the other pieces of the cow, Right. So it's also about the consumer learning how to consume more parts of that animal and not just the ribeye or the fillet, Yeah. And then you can also get it, cheaper. Again, if we buy the entire cow because it's cheaper, but eventually, starting probably next year, we're going to raise cattle because what do they need? They need grass, and grass needs water from rain and the sun to grow. So it's kind of, very inexpensive in comparison. Our chickens right now that we feed, an organic corn, soy-free, low PUFA feed, raising one meat bird, one chicken for consumption costs us about $30.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, for the amount of meat that's on that bird, compared to a cow, it costs a fraction thereof. So it's also about what is it that you want to eat? Humans and chickens, as far as diet, eating them is concerned, is not something that we've been doing for a long time. That's a very 200 years ago, nobody would have raised chickens for meat.
Yeah. Well, same with cow. No, that's relatively new. Wouldn't we be hunting more locally?
Well, it would have been bison or whatever.
Right. Relatives.
Ruminants are more like, we consumed ruminants more so than, even pigs we, consume probably, or, domesticated, have been domesticating for a while. But chickens in particular, is not something that, because a jungle fowl, the original jungle fowl, there is no meat on it. Lays 20 eggs a year. There's not. Why would you have that? Animal on your farm? Doesn't make sense.
It's a waste of time and energy, right? Yeah. Here we go quail hunting. And grouse is a big one. We call it the chickens of the forest here, right? Grouse, but they're so small. You have to kill so many of them to get one meal, but they're delicious. Exactly. We do the same thing. We buy a whole cow every year, and it is fascinating when you get the shipment and half the cuts. I'm like, when we first got our first one, I was like, I don't know what any of these are. I'm like, how to cook them? What is this? And I got to thankfully Google and research and learn how to cook different cuts of meat. But that's a really good point, right? To learn to broaden our horizon and understand that there's more to an animal if we're going to be eating it. And okay, this has been incredible. We could chat forever. I have so much that I want to pick your brain on and chat with you, but I want to be respectful of your time. Are there any final pieces you feel like we didn't cover that you want to make sure to share today?
No. I think we covered a lot. As you said, there's a whole lot more to cover, but I think we covered a good amount today.
Yeah, I think this has been really eye-opening for a lot of my listeners. We haven't had a lot of these conversations yet on the podcast. So thank you for coming in and opening up this conversation and sharing this truth. And I hope that everybody listening is starting to maybe percolate and have some different thoughts, right? About food and about your health and how you can maybe simplify things and get back to nature. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about here, and get back to health through that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely wonderful to have you here. Anybody who wants to come and check out more about what you're doing, I know you have also offered an amazing coupon code for our listeners. So I'll make sure that's in the show notes below for anyone who wants to come and get some of your amazing supplements. But where can everybody connect with you online?
Yeah, I mean, michaelkummer.com is my main outlet, the blog. You can find me on YouTube, if you search for Michael Kummer, Instagram. We have a dedicated homesteading blog, YouTube channel, as well as Instagram. So if you're interested in raising animals and seeing what it takes and learning from some of the mistakes that we've made, Kummer Homestead is where you can find us. And shopmichaelkummer.com is where you can find the supplements, the beef organ supplements, if you're not into eating fresh organs, which you should be.
Yeah. I still haven't figured out how to cook them in a way that I love them, other than grinding them and adding them to like a meat sauce or something I'm making. I can do that. Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Michael. I'll make sure all those links are obviously in the show notes below, and you can come in and check out everything you're doing. I'm definitely following your Homestead Instagram account. Definitely going to keep learning from you and from the lessons, the wins and the failures, right? As we learn together, and everyone out there, go and grow something, right? That's kind of the final message here. Go plant something, even if you live in an apartment, plant something on your deck and start connecting to your food there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning into another episode. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for tuning into another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.